this presentation was hard for me to write when I worked on it back in early February. And it surprised me because I had written 2 other presentations of this sort on other topics. And they were easy, I just had to tell it like it was for me. But when I sat down with the topic of Quakers and Peace, I discovered that this Quaker didn't really know how it was with her and peace. So it took some searching, and I think I'm still in process with it. But I guess that along the way, up to this point, I haven't quite felt like I've hit my stride with the idea of peacemaking. Not that I haven't done things of that sort. I've been part of peace demonstrations since my college days. I've been part of starting local peace organizations, several of them along the way, like Women in Black, which is an international group of women that wear black and stand publicly mourning costs of war. The Sandhill Society was a local group that we started to try to educate people about the different issues of social justice that go into war. But none of those felt quite right to me, and either they were taken over by someone else or laid down entirely. So I had to try several times to try to find an honest response to the questions, what is my early experience of peace, and what is my experience of peace now? And this is weird because this is all in spite of the fact that I'm a Quaker yogini. And for Quakers, the peace testimony is foundational. And in yoga, ahimsa, which is non-harming or non-violence, is foundational. It's a foundational precept. But, I think part of this is because the truth is, for much of my life, I haven't been very peaceful. This would surprise a lot of people because I'm good at looking peaceful. I can look cool and calm. But I fight my wars internally. Thomas Kempis said, first keep peace within yourself, then you can also bring peace to others. And my experience bears that out. I learned early on that peace is not the absence of conflict. Since in my family we all went around pretending that nothing bothered us, which made us all tense and neurotic, but we looked good. My dad would sometimes explode, and my mom was good at the cold shoulder. I suspect they were fighting their own wars inside. But in any case, we could never resolve our conflicts because we could never talk about them. We could never acknowledge that they were there. And nobody felt very peaceful. I did experience times of peace outside the house. I remember being quite young, and I have to apologize to those of you who were here last week. You've heard this story, but it's a big story for me. By the time I graduated from high school, I think that my ideas of peace included access to the natural world, some beginning notion of community, and the idea of trying to be good. In fact, I thought that if I could be good enough, somehow could make people happy, then everything would be okay and things would be peaceful. At college, I began to learn that being good might not be enough. It was the 60s, and the excited idealism was certainly intoxicating. There was a lot of talk about peace and love, and that all sounded really good. And feeling that I belonged somewhere, because I really could, I could relate to those ideas and to joining together with the community and to try to do something about those things. But that was all also kind of balanced against things like the killings at Kent State and the killing of Martin Luther King by the harmful effects of bad drugs on my friends, peace demonstrations turning violent, so it was more confusion. After college when I married, I tried to apply my strategy of being good and making people happy to my marriage, and I found it didn't work so well. I seemed to become a strange mixture of my mother and my father, which was totally confusing and terrifying. And sometimes I would turn a cold shoulder on my husband, and then other times I would scream at him, and I didn't want to do either one of those. When one of my twins was about 4, I came to at one point, holding his arms and shaking him, and with my nose about this far from him, screaming at him. And the look of terror in his eyes still, it broke my heart. Another time, around that same time, I was in the kitchen, and my husband was standing in the doorway, and he was saying to me, "Why are you always so angry?" And there was a cupboard door open here, and I slammed the cupboard door and I said, "I am not angry!" And then I went, whoa, there's something really wrong here. Those 2 events really got my attention. And it was pretty clear to me that my trying to be good wasn't working. So I began what turned out to be several years of therapy and the beginning of a lot of growing for me. It was the beginning of learning the truth of these words by Reverend William Sloane Coffin Jr. He says, "A spiritual person tries less to be godly than to be deeply human."
I guess I'll start out by mentioning that just a month or 2 ago, I read in Friends Journal, which is a Quaker magazine, comes out monthly. I read commentary by a woman who pointed out that that frequently people turn to violence because of a lack of resources, so that resourcelessness was equal to violence. And as I went through my learning, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual levels, learning about peace and what real peace is, not just anti-war, but real peace, I see myself now as having been given pieces of resources. So right now, I've got quite a few pieces in, but I still find myself adding them each day. You just sat with queries, for instance, and every time I sit with a query, I find that I gain resources because I look in nooks and crannies of myself that connect me with the divine, that mean that I have another option the next time I'm confronted with a situation where otherwise I could just be violence. And violence, I have to say, personal testimony is, usually has felt good to me for about 3 or 4 seconds. The venting of my anger or whatever. But almost always afterwards, that's when I felt the bad part of it, the negative part, the ramifications, and the fact that it was just going to spiral and grow and it didn't really solve things. When I was 20, I went to a Quaker meeting, and it was a major experience for me in my step towards learning about peace, true peace. I had just gone through a breakup or jealousy, fit of insecurity on my part with respect to a relationship. So like 3 days before, this woman I'd been dating, we were on the verge of breaking up. And I was all bent out of shape. I was angry, I was jealous, I was afraid, all those kind of things for like 3 days. I biked 100 miles and did various other things to try and let off some steam. And when I got back, I found out that the Quaker meeting was going to be meeting there. I only went to Quaker meeting maybe a couple times a year at that time when I was in college. And so I went to that. I sat down in someone's living room, and I had an immensely important, incredible experience again, what I brought with me to this was heartbreak and anger and all this mixture of things. And what happened was I was gathered in a giant hand of love and compassion, and I knew at that point that we're all swimming in an infinite ocean of unconditional love. That's what we live in. We don't perceive it a lot of times, but at that point I knew it. And when I knew that, I had no reason to be jealous. I had no reason to be afraid. No reason to be angry. Because those emotions came out of the fact that I wasn't going to have enough. They came out of the idea that somehow I couldn't have what was essential, and that unconditional love is the essential thing to my life. I'll let you speak for your lives. I mean, what I can say is my experience at that point, I got a resource that transformed the direction of my life. And that did not turn me into an angel. It didn't mean I didn't have a temper. None of those things happened. But what it means is, anytime I come up against anything now, I've got this resource and I can tap into it. And I know that God, divine, whatever, I'm held in a way that means I don't have to do violence. I still do it though. I'll use my foil here. My wife Sandra has said a number of times, and I'm not making up this quote for her, she really has said it. She said that she doesn't know if we'd be together if I hadn't discovered the men's group that I've been attending for some 20 years. In the men's group, I learned to do, with a group of men, which was real important for me, I could speak truthfully without having to mince words. And there were strong men there to reflect back to me, and men who had my own experience. And I could see the violence that I was doing. Not being shamed about it, but point it out and face it. So that going to men's group has been a major step for me in terms of working out peace. And another really crucial step was when Sandra and I, before we got married, before we could make that final step, we'd been living together for some years, wanted to get married, but we're lacking a resource, and we learned Imago relationship therapy, which has been a great tool, and I don't have time to tell you all about it, but what I want to say is, now when I have anger, when I have fear, when I have those things, there's a process that Sandra and I have that allows me to go beyond that, to find the wound and to work on healing the wound. And when I don't use that, things get out of control. So I have to make a confession. As much as I want to be a Quaker pacifist, I sometimes have fits, right? Angry fits. And there was one time, a long time ago, fortunately at this point, things got out of control between Sandra and me, and she was leaving the house, which kicks up abandonment stuff for me. And I went outside and we're yelling back and forth, and you know how sometimes you have to slap the table or kick the dog, or I wouldn't kick a dog. Somehow just express that. Well, there was this cat scratcher that was sitting there, this plastic round thing. And it was sitting outside because the cat had peed all over it, stinky. So we were airing it out. So it's sitting outside where she and I were arguing. So I picked it up and I went to just throw it, and I threw it down, but it turned into like a frisbee thing. And she was standing about 30 feet away, and it went down and up and right into the bridge of her nose. And she fell down screaming. And I really thought that I had maybe, her glasses had poked out her eyes, or just, I didn't know what. But I didn't know she could scream that loud. And that happened because I didn't do our Imago process at that time. And so what I want to say is, I'm thankful for that tool. I'm thankful for her forbearance for me when I haven't been the nonviolent person I want to be. So what I want to say is there's a lot of resources out there, and peace for me is no longer about just opposing a war. Of course I oppose wars. Anybody here think war is good? No one thinks that, or virtually no one thinks that. The real question is, what resources do we have to do something about it? I want to end with a little story quote. I'm part of a Quaker folk dance group that travels around, and one member of our group, who had spent a long time in Thailand, shared with us at one point something that she heard from a Buddhist monk there. And it, for me, expresses what I've learned about peace and how to live it out, how to make it happen in the world. What that Buddhist monk told to her was, a peaceful heart makes for a peaceful man, and a peaceful man makes for a peaceful family. Peaceful family for a peaceful village. Peaceful village makes for a peaceful nation, and that peaceful nation makes for a peaceful world. So it starts right here.